What if I told you that emotions and resonance plays a more influential part in making decisions as opposed to the part that factual details would play? And no, I'm not just talking about trivial decisions, I'm not just talking about our day-to-day lives, but I'm also talking about the decisions that would go on to affect subcultures, societies, and nations in their entireties. By a show of hands, how many of you would believe me when I say that emotions do play a bigger part than facts? Well, for those of you who do believe me, I believe me too. But what's interesting is why this is so believable, why this makes so much sense, and why is it that we're finally waking up to this post-truth era, despite it being prevalent in nations and societies long before we even began to think of its existence. Now, before I leave the stage tonight, my goal is to introduce to you, the audience, a new way to approach political rhetoric, especially when it's false. So how do we wake up to this post-truth era? What is post-truth? Relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Now, this is the definition that the Oxford English Dictionary gave us when the word post-truth was named 2016's Word of the Year. Now, I understand that this might still be a little difficult to comprehend, so let's put this in simpler terms. In his book, The Post-Truth Era, author Ralph Keyes went on to further simplify this concept of post-truth by saying that it is to be economical with the truth. It is to sweeten the truth, and it is to tell the truth improved. Now, before I continue, I'd be remiss if I don't take the time to mention my perspective and mention why my perception is shaped the way it is. Where I'm from, the humble little island of Sri Lanka, we are still, as a nation and as an economy, rising from the ashes of a disastrous civil war that lasted the better part of 30 years. Where I'm from, political rhetoric has gone on to shape the mindsets of the people of Sri Lanka. Having been born and raised in Sri Lanka, having lived nearly 21 years of my life in Sri Lanka, I found myself developing an interest towards political rhetoric, especially the emotional aspect of it. This is why I'm here today talking to you about post-truth and its emotional aspects. So let's get back. Let's dig a little deeper into the history of post-truth. The postmodernism era and the late 1980s is when this concept first came about due to the general level of distrust of theories and ideologies that the postmodernism era brought along with it. But it wasn't until 1992 that the term post-truth itself was used in a public context, where a Serbian-American author went on to claim that we as a free people have freely decided to live in some post-truth world. Now, this was when he was referring to the Iran-Contra scandal and the Persian Gulf War, which I won't be getting into in the interest of time. But following this, the United States saw its politics transform itself into what was commonly known back then as showbiz for uglies. Governments became less about the objective truth and more about the subjective truths, always plural, easily personalized, and frequently relativized. Now, with the rise in post-truth in our society, if we go on to juxtapose the usage of this term post-truth in 2015 and 2016, we'd see a staggering increase of 2,000%. So what could have possibly happened in just 2 years? 2015 and 2016 paved the way for the two events that went on to reinforce the existence of post-truth in our society. The first of which was Brexit. Now, I'm fairly certain all of us here know what Brexit is, but very briefly, this was when Britain decided to exit the European Union after over 40 years of being a member state of this customs union. Now, I understand that the reasons to leave or remain in the EU are still up for debate, but let's take a look at what exactly happened here. Why would the people have voted to leave the EU? What exactly was the political rhetoric that was used by the people of power at the time? Nigel Farage, the leader of the Leave campaign, identified the unquestionable importance of appealing to the emotional side of the people. And so he and his campaign came up with this. Leaving the EU would save the UK £350 million a week. Let's use this to fund our NHS, our National Health Services. We can build more hospitals. Now, I, for one, wouldn't want my country to be involved in some sort of a trade deal where we'd be losing this much of money on a weekly basis. It just doesn't make sense. But what we need to know about Brexit is that Nigel Farage and his campaign dropped this claim as soon as the Leave Remain vote concluded. He went on to say that he had never made this claim. He also went on to say that if this claim had gotten out, it was a mistake on the Leave campaign's part. So yes, the very reason that people would have voted to leave the EU was never a reason to begin with. That's lie number one. And that's not all. Ipsos Mori is one of the UK's leading research agencies. And according to their researchers, this figure of £350 million a week was false to begin with. It conveniently excluded the millions of pounds of support that the European Union provided the UK with for their educational sectors, for their agricultural sectors, and various other sectors. So yes, the very crux of this claim was false to begin with. So that's lie number two. So what do we know about these two lies? Did it work? Did it pay off? Now, of course, we know that it paid off because we know of the phenomenon that is Brexit. The Leave campaign ended up winning the vote 52% to 48%. But this in itself doesn't really tell us much about the post-truth aspect of this vote. But this does. 47%. 47% of all voters who voted, 47% of all voters who walked into those polling booths believed the Leave campaign's claim and the numbers to be true. Now, this tells us exactly how effective these claims were. So, what happened here? The people, the citizens, had an emotional response. They acted on it. They didn't follow up. They got caught up in the lies. They got caught up in the rhetoric. And the next thing you know, they weren't a member state of the EU anymore. Now, that escalated pretty fast, if you ask me. So let's move into the second event, the event that had post-truth written all over it from start to finish. The 2016 US presidential election. The fact-checking site PolitiFact deemed 33 of Hillary Clinton's 263 fact-check statements to be false or pants on fire. Now, a pants on fire statement refers to a statement that is worse than a false statement, an absolutely false statement. In the same way, PolitiFact deemed 144 of Donald Trump's 274 fact-check statements to be false or pants on fire. Now, looking at this, to me, it just seems like we had two blatant liars running for presidency. Terrorism and terrorist attacks in the United States and Europe have gotten to a point where they're not even being reported. I am the only candidate who ran in either primary who said, I will not raise taxes on the middle class. Now, as you may have already guessed, it wasn't entirely difficult for me to find these two examples. But who said what? The dates should give you a bit of a clue, but there you go. Now, I'm not going to say anything more about these two statements. Instead, let's see what PolitiFact had to say about them. Now, I know by now that I don't need to explain why these lies and so many of the other lies were said right throughout the campaign. It was to appeal emotionally to the voters. It was to sway their perception. The very same voters who would have believed close to anything that either one of the candidates would have gone on to see. But this election was interesting because there was more than just two candidates trying to bend the truth to their favor. There was also an alarming number of inaccurate news. Hillary Clinton is running a child sex ring out of a pizza shop. Democrats want to impose Islamic law in Florida. Thousands of people at a Donald Trump rally in Manhattan chanted, "We hate Muslims, we hate blacks, we want our great country back." I'm sorry, I'm going to say it one more time. "We hate Muslims, we hate blacks, we want our great country back." Very, very catchy. Also very, very untrue. In fact, none of these three news items ever happened anywhere in the United States. The one thing that we need to acknowledge is that technology and its advancement has always been a part and parcel of the rise in this concept of post-truth in our society. Technology, or more specifically the internet, is the primary method by which inaccurate news gets disseminated. So how do we protect ourselves from post-truth, or more specifically, inaccurate news? Now, I admit it, I love Facebook. I love it, I won't lie, but I love it for the right reasons. In 2004, when Mark Zuckerberg and his colleagues first launched Facebook, they named it a social networking site. They never named it a news agency. They never named it a news source, a news website, or anything of the sort. Unfortunately, that is how a majority of the people in our society today are using Facebook and so many of the other social networking sites. This is how we allow ourselves to be susceptible to post-truth and inaccurate news. Now, I want to share something with you that I use on a day-to-day basis. This is Fib. It is a Google Chrome plugin developed by 4 Princeton graduates, and it detects inaccurate news on Facebook. Very effective. The advancement of technology has also provided us with an abundance of methods for us to protect ourselves from post-truth and inaccurate news, Fib just being one of them. Now, the technology aside, what we need to know is that post-truth in itself is a deep cultural mutation that we need to better understand if we want to avoid the horrible specters of the past, the horrible specters including the likes of Brexit and the 2016 US presidential election. As global citizens, we must always be aware and always follow up, regardless of what emotions may be invoked. After all, keeping in line with this year's theme, where is the disruption if we allow ourselves to be susceptible to false political rhetoric? Where is the disruption if we let ourselves be gullible to false facts? Where is the disruption if you've believed every single word I've said up until this point and you're not going to follow it up for yourselves? Now, I'd like to tie this back to where I'm from. While it has been an absolute honor standing here in front of you, representing my country, sharing my research through a bilateral platform like TEDx, sometimes my mind wanders. I think about what Sri Lanka as a country could have avoided if we were able to travel back in time, say 40 or 50 years. I think about what we could have avoided as a country if we had never let the minorities in Sri Lanka be oppressed, if we had never let political rhetoric make the decisions for the people of Sri Lanka. Who knows what might have changed? Maybe, just maybe, this picture you're looking at right now would never have existed. Thank you.